I highly recommend you going and asking your league mates about these guys before the season starts. See if you can pick them up on the cheap. It can't hurt to at least send one offer. I actually sent an offer for George Pickens this morning. I went through and I offered Nathan in the Flock League Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle for George Pickens and Puka Nacua. So I tiered down from Amari to Pickens. I tier up from Waddle to Puka. Main reason I'm doing this is one, Nathan hates George Pickens. He's made that very, very clear. And two, here, I think Pickens is actually set up nicely for this season. Now, I want to be very transparent with you. You know, I hate taking wide receivers that are in bad offenses. This is why in round 2 of underdog drafts this year, I thought Malik Neighbors was a really bad pick, because if you're taking someone in round 2 that's going to be in a bad offense at wide receiver, you're almost drafting them near their ceiling unless the offense dramatically exceeds expectations. And in the case of the Pittsburgh Steelers, I am probably expecting it to be a below average offense this year. Now, are they going to be bottom 5 in the league? Probably not, even if they did look very bad in the preseason. But if you go through and you look at the price point for George Pickens at the moment, George Pickens, at least in ESPN drafts, is hovering around wide receiver 30 right now in ADP. You're seeing this guy consistently go off the board in the 7th round. And keep in mind with how his situation has changed this past year. We see the departure of Kenny Pickett in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Remember that Kenny Pickett was at the very bottom of the NFL in adjusted yards per pass attempt this past season. You bring in Russell Wilson, you bring in Justin Fields. I'm not going to sit here and act like all of a sudden he has great quarterback play. No, it's still probably bad. I just don't necessarily know if it will be one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire league. Like Kenny Pickett may not even be the backup to Jalen Hurts, but also you actually have less target competition with Deontay Johnson leaving Pittsburgh. You see Deontay go over to Carolina. And right now, if you look at the splits that we've had over the past 2 years with George Pickens, with and without Deontay Johnson, you've had 4 games with no Deontay Johnson where he's averaged 16.5 fantasy points per contest, and compared to the average of 10.3 points per game with Deontay in the lineup. So I think George Pickens is one of these guys that if you play in a league that's a full PPR format where you can start 4 or more wide receivers, such as the Flock League where we have 2 wide receiver slots and 2 flex spots, that's going to be the place that you want to go ahead and target George Pickens. If you play in like a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league, it's probably not worth your time. Our next guy we can say the same thing with Terry McLaurin. Now, Terry McLaurin probably is not worth your time if you're playing in that league where you only start 2 wide receivers and a flex. But I was able to get him in round 6 of the Flock League as my wide receiver 5. And here, I think he's set up to be in a decent spot this next season. Now, and to reiterate, we really want to be hesitant to go in on wide receivers that are in bad offenses. Also, y'all know I have been adamantly against Terry McLaurin for a very, very long time now. But if we are looking at McLaurin, the situation this year is set up where he can reasonably see a 30% team target share in Washington. We have no idea who the wide receiver 2 is going to be here, whether that's Ben Sinnott taking the targets at tight ends, whether that's Noah Brown, who just got cut from the Houston Texans, whether that's Luke McCaffrey, who some people don't even know if he's ready for the NFL. So McLaurin's going to come in, see a crazy target share with the departure of Jahan Dotson. If you look at over the past 2 years, the 5 games that McLaurin's played with no Dotson, he has averaged 13.2 fantasy points per game. Now, sadly, I'm not able to send out a trade for him because, like I said, I already took him as my wide receiver 5 in the Flock League. But I do want to reiterate, because he is in a pretty bad offense, I don't think this is a target for you if you play in a league where you're going to start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, because the best he's ever finished as is the wide receiver 20 from a points per game perspective. I don't know if he has a much higher ceiling than that. So in your regular redraft league, probably not worth bothering about. However, in underdog drafts right now, where you can get Terry McLaurin as your wide receiver 4 in round 5, I think that's a great spot to take him, because on underdog, if you take McLaurin, say as the wide receiver 33, and then all of a sudden he turns out to be the wide receiver 20, that is a great pick if you can see some spike weeks there. And of course, I'm going to be drafting on Underdog every single night till the season starts. It's the best place to get into an extra fantasy football draft this year because there's no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. It's how I won 150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And if you want to join a draft with me, you can find that link in the description and comment section. Code FLOCK will hook you up with my 2024 rankings, draft guide, and ADP consensus cheat sheet. Plus, Code FLOCK will give you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em more than less than half a total yard for week 1. And a Travis Kelce special pick'em more than less than half a total yard for week 1 as well. But going over looking at Rashid Rice. Rice is somebody that has been steamed up heavily in high stakes drafts and underdog drafts as of late. If you're in a high stakes draft, there's a chance that you saw Rashid Rice go in the third round. In the Flock League, obviously, we have some creators there that are in tune. Danny got a great deal on him in round 4, but I've seen in regular ESPN drafts, this is somebody that's falling to like wide receiver 32, and you can buy him as a wide receiver 3. We actually had great news this past week that it sounds like the NFL is not going to be taking action, and they're actually going to be letting the legal process play out for Rashid Rice. If they are letting the legal process play out, what that means more likely than not is Rashid Rice is going to be seeing his suspension in 2025. So if you're playing in the dynasty, obviously you have to keep that in mind. But in your regular redraft league, I mean, hell, I don't care if he's suspended in 2025. So going through and looking at his price tag, you have to keep in mind that this is a receiver that is with the best quarterback in the NFL, that is playing in a wide receiver room where you see Xavier Worthy get added in. We'll talk about Worthy in just one second, but Worthy is going to be the deep threat element in this offense. Rice is going to be the player operating close to the line of scrimmage, and Hollywood Brown is currently banged up. If you look at the second half of last year plus the playoffs this past season and go through and see what Rashid Rice did in fantasy, I mean, Rice gave you 10 targets against the Raiders, 9 targets against the Packers, 10 targets against Buffalo, 9 targets against New England, 12 targets against the Raiders, 6 against Cincinnati, 12 against Miami, 4 against Buffalo, 9 against Baltimore, 8 against the Niners. And if you're going to tell me I'm getting 8 to 9 targets consistently from the best quarterback in the NFL, in arguably one of the best offenses in the NFL, that's a player that I'm going in on. And another option that's in a phenomenal offense, I actually tried to make a deal with Zach for him. Zach put Brandon Ayuk on the trade block. I thought Ayuk was more likely than not going to be a Niner this next year. So I was like, okay, I'll roll the dice. I'll send you Terry McLaurin and I'll send you Austin Eckler. Give me back Brandon Ayuk. He wanted Tajay Spears and Devonta Smith. So sadly, we did not work out a deal. But I think sending out an offer for Brandon Ayuk right now may not be the worst thing in the world, especially if the Brandon Ayuk drafter doesn't understand how good of a situation that he finds himself in San Francisco this next year. Because if you look at this overall wide receiver core, yes, you have Kittle, yes, you have Debo, yes, you have McCaffrey. But at the end of the day, right now, the Niners project out to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL, according to Vegas sportsbooks. You add on the fact that Brandon Ayuk just gets paid a ton of money. You look at him stepping into his prime versus Debo Samuel being a little bit older, George Kittle being 31 years old. I think Ayuk's phenomenal value if you're able to buy him as a mid to low end wide receiver 2. I think he does very easily give you wide receiver 1 upside. Now, our next guy we're going to look at will be an older player. We're going to look at Cooper Kupp. Now, Kupp, this is really dependent on your league. Because if you are in those underdog drafts, if you are in a high stakes draft at the moment, you will see Cooper Kupp go in the second round, and you will see people price Cooper Kupp as if he is a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. There are some people that think about it way too much and overthink things dramatically to the point where they are now touting Cooper Kupp over Puka Nacua. And the reason for this is if you are looking at Kupp, this is a wide receiver that demonstrated a ceiling 2 and 3 years ago that almost no other player in fantasy currently has shown. The overall situation that you're looking at last season was Cooper Kupp dealing with multiple lower body injuries, which opens up the door for Puka Nacua to come out here and absolutely dominate, where people are now expecting that maybe the Puka knee injury flips the script this season, and it is a Cooper Kupp year. Now, I do not stand by that. I still want Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua had the best rookie wide receiver season of all time last year. Trust me, I didn't see it coming. I wish I did. I'm an idiot. We all know this. However, if we go to your regular redraft league, you don't have to take Cooper Kupp as a low-end wide receiver 1. You don't have to pay the price as if he's a high-end wide receiver 2. If you look at ESPN drafts, he goes with the 4-5 turn. He's priced in as if he's a low-end wide receiver 2 with upside. And if you're able to go through, if you're able to make a trade for Cooper Kupp there, I think that is a phenomenal move to make. Now, a couple of examples that you could do going back to me trying to maybe pivot up at wide receiver, going through and sending like Amari Cooper and Austin Eckler to see if we can get Cooper Kupp. And I already can hear you in the comment section going, oh my gosh, Mason, that's a horrible trade offer, blah, blah, blah. Come on, send an offer. This is what I'm recommending that you do with your league mates as well. The worst case scenario is they tell you no. Best case scenario, they accept. And hopefully, at the very minimum, you do get a counter and then you can make that decision. Now, going over to our next wide receiver, Xavier Worthy is bumping up here a bit for a couple different reasons. One, Xavier Worthy did look great in the preseason. Obviously, he had some big plays. Two, Hollywood Brown actually gets injured in the preseason. Hollywood Brown has already been ruled out for week 1, and Xavier Worthy looks to be an every down player in this Kansas City Chiefs offense. Now, we already mentioned that Rashid Rice looks like he's not going to be getting suspended this year. And with Rashid Rice not getting suspended, you may say, well, Mason, that's going to be taking targets away from Xavier Worthy. But you need to understand that Worthy and Rice almost play two completely different positions on the football field. You actually only had 31 total intended air yards per game for Rashid Rice last season, indicating that Rashid Rice really just operates across the line of scrimmage. What's going to happen is Rice gets the dump off balls close to the line of scrimmage. He picks up yards after the catch, where Worthy is going to be the vertical element in this offense. They don't eat into each other. Instead, they actually play alongside each other and boost each other's production, which is a very, very, very rare thing to say at wide receiver. If you look at where Worthy's going right now in regular leagues, he is going on ESPN past pick 100. He's being priced in as if he's a wide receiver 4. And I think Worthy's a great example of if you play in a league where you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, go get Worthy. Why the hell would you take someone like Deontay Johnson, where Deontay Johnson, yeah, he's probably has a higher floor, but the ceiling is severely capped, where if you play in that league with only 2 wide receivers and 1 flex spot, what we're doing is we're chasing for upside, upside, upside. Worthy has that, especially with the Hollywood injury, if it's going to open the door for him. And then our next guy will be Jaden Reed. If you look at Reed, he checks a couple of the very easy boxes we look for at wide receiver. He was a good rookie wide receiver going into year 2, and he's going to be playing in a good offense in 2024. Now, obviously, the concerns that you have at the moment is Christian Watson's there. Romeo Doubs is there. Jaden Reed is there. Dontavian Wicks is there. Luke Musgrave is there. Tucker Kraft's there. Josh Jacobs can catch the ball. You have so many different weapons in Green Bay. But what is interesting is if you look at who's being priced to be the wide receiver 1 here in high stakes drafts, high stakes drafters are actually saying it's Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed going a full round before Christian Watson. Whereas if you flip the script and you look at this in regular fantasy football drafts, Christian Watson is going before Reed. I would make an argument that Reed was hyper efficient last season as a rookie. And at the same time, with Christian Watson, you have injury concerns that may not be present with Jaden Reed. So if you can buy Jaden Reed as a wide receiver 4, I think that's very interesting. But Jaden Reed, similar to some of the other wide receivers on this list, I do think it's going to be a little more appealing in that format where you start 2 wide receivers and 2 flexes, or 3 wide receivers and a flex, and it's a full PPR format. And I do want to reiterate that wide receiver strategy is so important in understanding your league. I'm sure if you submitted your team for a roster breakdown on flogfantasy.com, you've already heard me talk about this at length. But if you're playing in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format, I promise you, going through and rostering depth wide receivers that don't have a crazy high ceiling, guys like Deontay Johnson, it doesn't really make a difference from an expected value perspective. And any chance you get, you should be trying to chase for a better player. Now, of course, if you're playing in that league where you can start 5 wide receivers from week to week perspective, there Deontay Johnson will make a difference because the replacement level player is just going to be significantly lowered. So please understand, the more wide receiver slots, the more flex spots you add in, the more that we are just chasing the median projection with these receivers. Whereas if you play in a league where you want to start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, every wide receiver you go after, you need to be thinking upside, 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 especially if that player is going to be on your bench, such as Jaden Reed, Xavier Worthy, Terry McLaurin, and George Pickens. They should all be on your bench in that format for week 1. Hell, Terry McLaurin may be on my bench in a league where I have 2 flex spots week 1. But I think that's all I have for you. Really do appreciate you. Really hope that you were able to get something from this. And of course, if you want to get in a draft with me, you find that link in the description, comment section. Code FLOCK will hook you up with my 2024 rankings, draft guide, ADP cheat sheet. Plus, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, Christian McCaffrey special pick of more than less than half a total yard. Plus, a Travis Kelce special pick of more than less than half a total yard for NFL kickoff. So make sure you take advantage of that. But thank you. Really do appreciate you. And really hope I can draft with you in the live stream later tonight.